Okay, so problem solution market kickoff. I think so. Here's what we're going to cover off on today. First, let's start off by talking about what's the difference between problem solution fit versus problem market fit. We'll do a real quick introduction into the phase and what this initial next 4 weeks is going to feel like. Again, like many of you are at different stages of your business. Some of you are already in market. Some of you might have even raised a little bit of capital. But we're going to step you all back and go back to the fundamentals. If we have a really strong base, a really strong foundation, then that allows us to kind of build the business and the growth of the business from that foundation. We're going to talk to you about what's the lockbox. So in every phase, there's a lockbox. And what the lockbox is the thing that unlocks that stage for your particular business. If you get the lockbox right, everything else becomes easy. A couple of helpful tips to help expedite your progress. And then we're going to talk through some next steps. You're all going to get an assignment coming off out of this. Okay, cool. So first, let's talk about problem solution fit. What is problem solution fit? So especially in Web 2 and in startup world, everybody likes to talk about product market fit, which is fine. And we're going to talk about product market fit as well. But at the end of the day, all successful companies are built to solve a problem, right? So like these are three, pretty well-known Web 2 companies, but they got started by solving real problems for people. One of the case studies that I like to talk about in the early days, it's funny, I literally just ran into one of the original founders of Venmo randomly in New York at the Russian bathhouse recently, of all places. Venmo is a great case study, and I think I talked about this yesterday. Venmo now is like this massive global peer-to-peer payments company. But most people don't realize how they started. Venmo started as a way for fans to buy merch from their favorite musicians at a concert. It was a way to do simple mobile payment transactions. It took that company 7 years to realize that original vision. So they didn't start out with this very grand problem of becoming the global peer-to-peer, payment transfer platform. They started out trying to solve just a very specific problem. I, as a fan, there was no easy way for I, as a fan, to purchase the merch from my favorite musicians when I went to one of their concerts. And that was the problem that Venmo originally set out for. And so for all of you, I think that kind of the TLDR here is you've got to get to the root. You've got to get to the heart of what makes your business or your startup successful. And that is to find the actual problem that you are solving for your users and customers. So, and there are really some unfair competitive advantages that you have as a Web3 startup. And we're going to talk about that at the very end here. But I want to go back to the fundamentals, the root. So the reality is that most startups never actually find a real problem that they're trying to solve. They find little annoyances, they find generalities, not specifics, and they never really hone in on pain points. Like, what are the actual pain points? And that's why most startups, most companies, not even startups, but most companies, most businesses really struggle to find users, find customers, find investors. Usually when, I do a lot of mentoring outside of Tachyon. Like, I'm a mentor for Kernel, and there are a number of startups who I try to help out, who have gone through Tachyon, and now they're kind of on their second or third company. And anytime a founder comes to me and they're like, hey, we're really having trouble getting customers or getting users. Can you give us like some growth hacks or some growth tactics? Usually it's not a tactic that's not working. Their solution is not solving a real problem or fulfilling a real need for their particular users or customers. And that's usually the heart of it. And this is why we step all of you back, no matter where you are in the stage of your company, and start off in phase one with problem, solution, market. It's the key. It's the lockbox. So there are layers and nuances to this that are specific to all of you, specific to your industry. If you're building something in the NFT space or the DeFi space or the infra space or the metaverse space, the problems that you're going to solve or the needs that you're going to have to fill in are going to have layers. They're going to have little nuances. But at the root are like the core needs that all humans are trying to solve problems against, right? So like, you guys are all building on the frontier. You're building on the cutting edge. And our technology is new, but the problems that we have as human beings are as old as time. So you need to get to the root of what does your product do for your users? And those problems have been around for a really, really, really long time. So if we're going to go back to first principles and start from there, we need to start asking ourselves the fundamental questions. Fundamentally, people buy solutions to problems, and it sounds counterintuitive at first until you start to think about it. But we don't buy or use products that fulfill a need. We buy products or use products that fulfill a want. Wants are emotional. And what we're really buying is access to an emotion. That's what we're really trying to get to as consumers. And an emotion is essentially a want. So users aren't really buying a need. Are there any, just out of curiosity, are there any people within, we usually have one within the call here who have a background in neuroscience? Anybody? I know there's like some machine learning. I was kind of scrolling through. Okay, all right. I won't get too deep into this, but like, human beings, we're not logical creatures. We're not logical, rational creatures. We're very emotional creatures. And in fact, if you look at the speed of brain neural circuit firings, you'll see that the brainstem, so that the core, that's our early reptilian brain, actually fires about 150% faster than the limbic system. So that's the system that kind of got built around the brainstem. And the limbic system fires about 250% faster than the prefrontal cortex region. And that's the rational decision making portion of our brain. And so our limbic system and our reptilian brain actually fires much faster than our very logical, rational decision-making part of the brain. And you don't need to be a neuroscientist to like really dig deep into this, but what that means is that you need to focus on the core benefits of your product. And so, when it comes to like the core human wants, what you're solving for, let's talk through a couple of them. First of all, speed. Right? Especially today, the world is moving really fast. If you can help me move faster, what you're doing is you're giving me alpha, right? You're giving me time alpha. So one of the core human wants is speed. Help me do something faster. Next, time and convenience. Right? So we all have a million things sitting in our inbox and in our to-do box, and there is not enough time to do it. If you can give me back time, you've got me. Or if you can make things more convenient for me, you've got me. You've given me, again, it's like time alpha. You've given me real value. The third core human want is newness. Oh man, newness drives a lot of purchase behavior, especially in crypto and Web3. So newness, and then that FOMO at the very end, number 5, are two really big ones in the Web3 ecosystem. But newness is all about being seen or being seen as in, or having some kind of alpha, right? We see this on crypto Twitter all the time, right? Like people who like to tweet like, I've just found this new thing, or I've been playing with this thing, or you subtly drop that you're in the know. That's what newness is. It's about being the first to know about the new thing and other people acknowledging that you're at the bleeding edge. That does something for our ego. That drives a core want. These are also people who are driven by newness. These are also your early adopters in terms of crossing the chasm. For those of you that have read that book, these are your innovators and your early adopters. It's all about the newness, the new thing. Next, guarantees, right? Guarantees, which is really giving your users certainty. The world is a deeply uncertain place. So if you can give me a guarantee, what you're really giving me is certainty. You are filling that fear that comes from uncertainty, because everything is uncertain. And then the last one, number 5, is celebrity or FOMO or association, right? Human beings are tribal. And the worst thing that can happen is to be ostracized by the tribe. Back in the old days, it meant certain death in early human history. So being able to associate in tribes, and being able to associate with the highest in the pecking order of the tribe creates comfort. Deep down, we as human beings all want to be seen and acknowledged by one another. And so if you can if your product fulfills this core human want of being able to be a part of something, it really translates into growth, into traction. By the way, the inverse of this is the fear of missing out, or FOMO. And then in terms of DeFi, what I would call the FinTech 2.0 killer stack, the core, the root, again, we're kind of like at the root directory of human wants. If you're playing in the DeFi or FinTech space, or like NFT space, or any kind of speculation of financial, the emotional or the want killer stack is fear, hope, and greed. Feelings of financial security are second only to feelings of sex. So if you're playing in that space, you just need to understand what you're tapping into in terms of why people use products. And this is like the core root directory. Cool. So in Tachyon, we focus on problem solution fit first, because getting this right will save you a ton of time. It'll save you a ton of energy. It'll save you a ton of resources, and it'll save you a ton of technical debt and focus, right? This is everything for a startup founder. And it really positions your business for what I would just call inevitable success. It almost becomes inevitable that you build a product in a market that users want or need. But you need to get down to the root, first principles, and then start to build your way up. So for each of you, I think I would press you to realize that the core needs that we just went over are there for all of you, and you might have some synergy, you might have some stacks of some of these, but the nuances are going to be different depending on your industry. All right, so that's problem solution fit. Okay, and we spend a lot of time on that, especially in phase one. But then the question is okay, well, what's problem market fit? And problem market fit is kind of putting a number of pieces together all in one. You know that you have problem market fit when you kind of check all of these boxes. So problem market fit is when the right team focuses on a high value pain point in a growing market with a unique advantage in their solution and a specific target identified. So this is what we start to call the lockbox. You need all of these to hit the lockbox in terms of finding problem market fit. And this is where our focus is going to be over the next 4 weeks as we kind of like sprint through problem solution market. All right, cool. So let's talk about nice to haves versus need to haves. So there's this analogy or this metaphor that I like a lot in Web2 startup world of, are you building a vitamin or are you building an aspirin? And so the metaphor is very, or the analogy is very simple, which is, a vitamin is something that is a nice to have. It's something that you take daily because, you're making small incremental tweaks to your health, right? Like maybe you're slightly deficient in vitamin E, you're slightly deficient in vitamin C or what have you, right? Like a vitamin is a nice to have, but an aspirin is, oh shit, I'm in pain and I need to relieve this pain right now. And so when you think about what you're building and the user that you're building it for, this is a really good framework that I like to go back to. It's a very simple analogy that you can go back to simply ask yourself, am I building a vitamin, a nice to have right now, or am I building an aspirin? Right. And so like these two examples are, I don't want to call out any Web3 projects, but I see a lot of vitamin Web3 projects in the ecosystem. They are nice to haves, but they are not solving a real problem or fulfilling a real need for their users. And so, very clearly, nobody wants a fucking camera brush, right? Or a comb attached to a phone. That's kind of ridiculous. But I see this in crypto and Web3 a lot. I see a lot of, vitamins or camera combs. Whereas, an aspirin, and the reason why I like this example, so it's projected that the selfie stick industry is going to hit 6.4 billion by the year 2025. I hate selfie sticks. I absolutely hate them. I am not the consumer for them. I don't want to see them. I live in New York. I see motherfuckers in Times Square with these things all the time. They drive me absolutely batshit crazy. I'm not a big fan of them. And yet, This is a $6.4 billion industry. It is massive because it fulfills a real need for people, which is, I want to have a wider angle shot of myself because I'm looking for social alpha on Instagram or Futur, soon to be, right? So like your aspirin needs to fill a real need or solve a real problem for people. Even if it's as silly as, in my opinion, as silly as a selfie stick, it's something that consumers and users really want. Okay, so over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be asking you guys to really dig deeper into your problem, your market, and your solution. We just came out of the one-liner problem, market, solution. We got to see your early slides, and for a number of you, I was giving you the same feedback, the same advice, which is prove the problem. Your solution, if you open the door, you got to close the door. Give me a visual. Your one-liner should be using something like a for only because framework, so that you can give me your secret sauce. So for all of you, though, it's very clear to us, which is where most people start, especially in their startup journeys, is you need to dig a lot deeper into your market, a lot deeper into your users and your customers, and a lot deeper into your differentiated solution. You need to go deeper and deeper and deeper, getting to the second, third, fourth, fifth why, as you start to figure out, like, what are you really building for who? How is it differentiated? How is it solving that problem? And then how are you going to make sure that you're moving through what could be a really big market? Phase one, let's talk about the lockbox for phase one. So this is the product market fit Web 2 lockbox. Should look pretty familiar. I think I just kind of touched on it, and most people who are familiar with what product market fit is in Web 2, this should look familiar. There's a problem, there's a solution, there's a market, you have a unique insight, and you have a team. By the time you're done with phase one, you will have slides around this. You'll be able to articulate what the big problem is that you're going after. Well, I'm getting ready to unpack this a little bit. What your differentiated solution is in the marketplace. You have direct competitors. You also have indirect competitors. And so you need to figure out who both your direct and indirect competitors are and how your solution is differentiated. You'll have an understanding of your market. Markets have motion. I gave a number of you that feedback in the last session. You'll have a unique insight. The way that you are going to get a unique insight is digging much deeper into your users, doing customer interviews, and putting early prototypes in front of them to test some of your key assumptions and be curious, asking why. And then you'll highlight your team. In Web3, we have some unfair competitive advantages to the problem market fit playbook. Product market fit playbook, which is namely community, composability, and liquidity. So you as Web3 founders have some serious firepower in building your startup. And this is like rocket fuel to the PMF playbook. But let's unpack these one by one. So problem, what makes a good problem? A good problem has two things. It's got insight and it's got intensity. Right? So some of the key things that you're going to have to answer as you go through figuring out what your problem really is, like what is really the problem. Some of the questions that you want to ask is, what is the problem? Who has the problem? How often do they have it? What's the frequency of that problem? How painful is it? Is it a kind of sort of problem, or is this like a real problem? Is it a kind of sort of need? Like I kind of sort of want to do this. It'd be nice if I could do this, or I really need this like tomorrow. Especially for those of you that are starting to do customer interviews, coming out of talking to humans, the pre-reading session, you'll get people who will be like, oh, it'd be nice if I could do this. It'd be nice if I could do that. And you'll have a lot of questions of like, how do I prioritize my product roadmap? One of the best ways to prioritize your roadmap is to figure out what are people actually willing to pay you for tomorrow. If you have some version of tokenomics in your business, we'll talk about what that looks like. It's a little different, but you need to get to the heart of like how painful or how big of a need is this problem really that in terms of your solution that you're filling. How expensive is it to solve, especially when we start talking about things like switching costs? So like Spheron, for example, right? Like as you guys are going after like the developer infra stack, how expensive is it to solve that problem for your developers relative to their switching costs? What are their options in the market? You need to start thinking about that and have a really good answer for that. What are the current solutions? Somewhat related to that. What unique insight do you have on the problem? What do you know that I don't know? The only way that you learn something that I don't know is to get levels deep into your users, into your ideal users, and really understand what truly drives them. Why are they really interested in solving this problem? Why are they really interested in your product? Why are they really here? Like, is it because you're hot new shit and they really want to be on the bleeding edge because they really care what their friends think about them? Is it because you're saving them time and they've been banging their head against the wall and like they optimize everything and they can't do this for the 100th time? Like, what is it that you're actually solving for them? You need to be able to answer that and articulate it and boil it down and distill it. And then who are the buyers? Pro tip, sometimes your customer and your user are two different people. So, blockchain gaming. We talked about this during your office hours yesterday. There is a Web3 version, and I think you guys are building it, of the B to B to C. Sometimes the customer that you're servicing or the buyer of the product is not the end user of the product. And so you need to think about that dynamic. Who are you solving what for, and what's most valuable at this particular stage? Is it more valuable to solve the problem of the user, or is it more valuable to solve the problem of the customer? So you need to understand the buying decision or the conversion funnel, what that looks like, and be able to understand the buyers and how those decisions get made. So that's how a really good problem gets understood. Again, a good problem has both insight and intensity. All right, the market. There are two moments in your pitch deck, which you'll hear me talk about quite a bit. And again, your pitch deck, we talked about this yesterday, your pitch deck is just the output of the 10,000 hours that you're going to put in. But there are two moments in your pitch deck that have motion. The market slide and the growth and traction slide, which we'll start to get to as a part of phase 2. But here in phase 1, your market has motion. And what I mean by that is a really good market is growing. There's a timing element and it's changing, and it's evolving. So the market slide is the first time that you start to analyze what's the size of my market. How fast is it growing? Am I playing the game of I'm in a really tiny market, but it's growing like 10,000% CAGR and I'm going to dominate that market? Or are you stepping into a multi-billion-dollar market and you're trying to carve off a small percentage of that really large market? And we'll talk about, we have a workshop coming up on SOM, SAM, and TAM. We'll talk about how you level up through the markets. You need to have a story of how you're going to level up through your SOM to your SAM to your TAM. But this is the first time that you need to start to show some motion around your marketplace. So how fast is it growing? Why is it growing? Do you understand why the market is growing? What are the behaviors, the consumer behaviors, the consumer psychology behind why this market is growing the way that it's growing? Can you answer that for me and be able to answer that for an investor or to early employees who want to join your company as you de-risk yourselves? What shifts and trends are driving its growth and change? What's happening culturally that's taking place that all of a sudden, hint, crypto, Web3 is eating a lot of Web2 right now, right? You all know that. That's why you're building in Web3. That's a massive shift. But what else is taking place in like a macro environment that's going to affect your startup and the industry that you're playing in? What are the big macro trends that you can surf on top of? There's a lot happening around. Who was just talking about NFT Fluid was just telling us, was it NFT Fluid? No. Sorry. It was Respect was just talking about their platform and how they're building for this creator economy. By the way, creator economy is too buzzy of a word. That was the feedback that I gave to them. That immediately tells me bullshit. You need to especially if you're playing in a big macro market like that, where there are a lot of buzzwords, you need to especially have a unique insight into that particular marketplace. But the creator economy is a massive market. There's a huge change that's taking place culturally within society? And so what are those big macro trends? And then finally, what's the history of your market? A lot of founders, for some reason, especially like first-time founders or like earlier in their startup career founders, don't understand the context of the space that they are disrupting. And so for a lot of you, there's a great article, I think Chris Dixon wrote it from A16Z back in the days, talking about the idea maze. For a number of you, like if you don't understand the context or the history of your market, especially one that you are disrupting, and Web3 is disrupting a lot of markets, I would really go back and understand and study the landscape, because there are a lot of founders who hit a lot of landmines, who made a lot of mistakes. And if you can learn from them and understand why we ended up the way that we ended up in this particular industry, it will be extremely helpful for you understanding the market dynamics. All right. Third, solution. A good solution has two elements to it. It is differentiated. In other words, it's different than what my options are in the marketplace, and it gives me a unique advantage. And so we talked about this earlier, but your solution really needs to tap into those core, fundamentally at the root, those core human needs. Now, again, the nuances are going to be different as you build up. But the key to a really good solution in terms of what you're building in the marketplace is you need to be differentiated. We see none of you are this. This is why you all got selected for Tachyon, but we see hundreds of companies that apply to Tachyon and they're just not differentiated yet. You know, it's a me too. It's like, I've seen this 20, 30 times, right? Like there's nothing differentiated yet. And usually what that means is that the founder just hasn't spent enough time understanding how they are going to differentiate themselves in the marketplace, or understanding what consumers or what users of that market are looking for in terms of like a differentiated solution. But there's a couple of things here. So one, the differentiation is two-part. There's the differentiation for your users or your customers, and then there's the differentiation from your vantage point, which is simply to say, what is your unique advantage as a founder? So perfect example is we were in office hours with Alex from HashScan yesterday, and we were talking about low fidelity experiments, and he's like, well, question for you, like, should I be writing blog posts or should I be writing Twitter threads? I'm a developer, and I'm really fast at building things. And so, the answer is, well, that's your unique differentiation. If you're really good at building low fidelity experiments by writing code, use what you have to your advantage, right? Like that's a key part of your differentiation. And so same thing with a unique or differentiated solution here is it's differentiated in the marketplace in terms of your customers and users, but it's also differentiated based on you and your founders and your team. Where are you guys differentiated? Where do you have an unfair competitive advantage? And that's what you need to leverage in terms of your solution in the marketplace. A really good solution has a unique insight into the need. I'm not going to steal his thunder because Brian, actually, he's much better than I am. But Brian Dell's going to talk to you guys tomorrow. And I think one of the things that he's really good at is he's really good at framing problems and framing solutions with a unique insight. And a unique insight, that the framework that I really like, as you're thinking about, is this a unique insight or not, is everybody thinks it's this, but really it's that, right? So like back in the days, during DeFi Summer 2020, everybody would say to me, like, of course, DeFi is going to be a big thing. And of course, like everybody knows that, liquidity is one of the killer applications of DeFi. But one of the unique insights there was that the onboarding experience, and this is obvious now, but the onboarding experience in terms of onboarding into DeFi protocols was actually the problem. That was the prohibitive part of people aping into these DeFi protocols. And so, again, that's super obvious today, but it wasn't as obvious back in DeFi Summer 2020. So I think for each of you, you need to figure out what's the unique insight into the needs of your users. And it's the framework, again, that I like is everybody thinks it's this, but in actuality, it's that. And then lastly, especially when explaining what your product does for people, you need to have an elegant explanation of how it creates value. And so one of the ways that I really like to do this is I like to tell a story. I like to tell a story of a customer. I like to tell a story of my user, Sean Johnson. Sean Johnson is a New Yorker. He's moving fast. He's in the city that never sleeps. He doesn't have a lot of time. And so that's why we created Tachyon as this global remote program so that he could get connected not only to founders around the world, but he can do so from the convenience of his New York apartment, right? Anytime I want to explain what I'm doing or what I'm building, I want to do so via an elegant explanation. And one of my favorite ways to do so is to just tell a story, right? People like to hear stories. The other thing that you need to keep in mind when talking through your solution, especially in Web3, is again, humans are tribal, and you need to speak the language or the vocabulary of the tribe. So if you're building something for gamers use a certain type of language, a certain type of vocabulary. And if you're not using that in your solution, telling how your solution solves a particular problem using their vocabulary, your language, you are an outsider. You are not a part of the tribe, right? Like if you're doing so with NFTs or DeFi or what have you, right? Like you're not talking about risk management. You're talking about getting rugged. Right. And so use that language in explaining your solution in terms of how it creates value and solves a problem or fulfills a need for your particular audience. Okay, team is the last component of the traditional Web2 product market fit playbook. And really the key to a really strong and solid team is the right team, one, has domain knowledge. So sometimes that means you come from the space. Other times it just means that you're a fast learner and you've built a learning machine. But you know the space. I can't tell you how many founders we talk to who's building this really a really complex institutional DeFi thing, and they know nothing about institutional finance. Zero, right? They're just like, oh yeah, this is what I want to build. Well, you need to go get you need to have domain knowledge, right? You need to understand the context of the space that you're operating in or that you're disrupting. Second, cross-functional, right? And so especially in the beginning, founders need to be generalist specialists. In other words, you wear a lot of hats, you do a lot of things. Same with people who participate in DAOs, same with early employees, right? You need to be able to do a lot of things. The last part, what separates great founders from good founders is having a true north. And what I mean by that is my favorite founders are the ones that are highly opinionated about, open to feedback and adaptable, but highly opinionated about what the world is going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years and how their solution is going to transform the world and transform the industry that they're playing in. Highly opinionated about that. And so you as founders need to have a true north. Now, there's no cheat code for how you get a true north. It's just, this is it is your vision of the world. It's how you see the world and what you think the world is going to look like. But I will tell you, the more reps you put in, the more customer interviews you do, the more conversations you have with early users, the more iterative product cycles you go through, the more that true north gets gets refined. You start to have a really polished version of the world that is going to exist by the time you've fulfilled your mission. And so a really solid team, one, has background in the space that they're playing in. Two, has a real passion for the problem. I don't desire to work with founders. I fucking have to work with founders. Founders are my people. They are my tribe. You speak my language. You have to be one sick son of a bitch to step into trying to build a company, especially in crypto and Web3. I have to work with founders, or it feels like a part of me is missing inside. You have to be passionate about the problem that you're solving. If you are not, I would tell you go find another problem to solve, because you are going to be in the trenches taking lead bullets for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Even though some of you are going to successfully exit to the community through a token, we do have some unfair competitive advantages in crypto, which I'm going to get into next. But even then, right, like you've got a DAO, and right, you're probably one of the core contributors to that DAO. So like you need to really be passionate about the space that you're in and the problem that you're trying to solve. And then lastly, I mean, like you're not going to solve this coming through the door, at least with Tachyon, but you need to have a really solid team has experience shipping together. Building something with a team is like this is a trope, but it's like getting into a marriage or a partnership, right? Like you need to trust one another. You need to rely on one another. Like people that I work with, I need to see them in the trenches. I need to see, not that everybody's good on the good days, right? Like the good days take care of themselves. You want to see your founders during the bad times. Like I'm talking the really bad times. We're about to run out of money and we don't know how we're going to extend our runway. We haven't grown. Our users aren't coming in. Like we don't know how to get into market. We don't know what the fuck we're doing. And no VC will respond to our emails. That is a team that team that stays together through all of that. That's a team that I want to bet on every single day, twice on Sunday. All right. I feel like I'm being a dead horse now. Let's talk about the Web3 unfair competitive advantages to the product market fit playbook. So, you guys have advantages in building this space that your Web 2 counterparts do not have. I can tell you because I've built a couple of companies in Web 2. First is community. So in Web 3, your early adopters can also be your early backers. They can be your early evangelizers. And so, we put a heavy emphasis on building in public and building your community. Community is especially important when you get the right incentives aligned. Now, the thing that you need to keep in mind in terms of incentives and building a community is, yes, we do have things like tokens and tokenomics, which gives us extrinsic motivations. But I would tell you the really secret sauce to building a strong community is the culture and figuring out what are those intrinsic motivations. Why are people there outside of just the potential to make money or get rich, right? Like what's really driving them being a part of your community? Those intrinsic motivations. What's the vibe? What's the culture, right? Like on Tachyon, built by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs. We are kings of being in the trenches and eating shit and just like doing whatever it takes to make sure that we tip the scale in our founders' favor. Like everything that we do is for and because of founders, period, end of story. And it's because we believe that Web3 is going to massively disrupt everything. We believe that Web3 is the future. It will be called the internet by the time it all is said and done. And we believe founders are the best ones to build this new open and interoperable ecosystem that's user owned and operated. That's why people come to Tachyon. That is the vibes that we create in our community. And so for you need to think about, why are people joining your community? Why do they want to be a part of your community? Why do they want to join you and come along on this mission with you? So building in public, creating culture in your community early are some of the keys to success here. And we'll talk about this a lot more, I think, in phase 2. But we believe that when it comes to building a community in Web3, founders really need to think about and focus on community ownership, community participation, and community governance. Now, I will tell you, we're biased in our thinking. We are big believers in progressive decentralization. We are big believers on a small core contributor team, starting with trying to find product market fit and then starting to open up to the community and letting the community own and participate in governance, because we will tell you, governance, things do not move fast when you have a very large ecosystem where people are all contributing. Now you get a lot of value from that. What's the old trope? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So there are a lot of advantages with going together. But we believe that you should build up to that. And then the other thing that happens is that people come into your community not because they think they're going to be able to ape into a token or get rich, but because they're really there for the vibes. They're really there for the culture. They're really there for the mission. And I think that's really what you want to focus on in your early community. It's the old Kevin Kelly 1,000 true fans. You want to find the 1,000 people that fucking love you and love what you're building and can't live without it. And that's better than having like 1 million people who are kind of like whatever about you. All right, that's enough about community. Composability. So composability is, this is one of the key components. I remember in the early days of Tachyon, we would have, especially like Web2 VCs who are looking to start making investments in Web3. They just didn't get it. They didn't get composability, and they didn't get open source. It made them very nervous because what they were thinking is where's the value capture? If everything is open and can be used by the ecosystem, how do these founders capture value? How do they make money eventually? Because eventually I need them to make money, right? And what I would explain to them is composability is one of the key components to growth and traction, and like not linear growth and traction, but asymmetric growth and traction. It's one of the unfair competitive advantages that builders in crypto and Web3 have. Composability is thinking through how your company or how your protocol becomes a composable piece of the stack so that other developers, other builders can take that piece and plug it into whatever they're building or build on top of it, right? And so, most Web2 startups are a little too concerned with value capture too early, in my opinion. Really, for you as Web3 founders and builders, we want you to learn to think through like your product in terms of how is what you're building become a piece of the composable stack. And there's a couple of elements to that, right? Like which parts are open source and will remain open source? What's the interoperability of your protocol and what you're building in terms of like other parts of the ecosystem? What's the portability, right? So like, can people take their tokens, for example? Can they take their NFTs and put that across into different experiences or different metaverses? How do you remain permissionless? There are times where you do want to have permission, but there are a lot of times where you want things to remain permissionless. And so you need to start thinking about those elements in terms of your composability. I think a lot of you are bought in here, so I don't need to beat that to death. And then I think the last thing is liquidity. So I think the obvious part of liquidity is like tokens, right? And tokenomics. But I think there's more to liquidity than just tokens. And let me explain what I mean here. Tokens and token-based economies give us access to liquidity and make things liquid that would otherwise have been illiquid. So assets is like the example that most people think about and focus on. But liquidity also pertains to, I think, governance and also pertains to consensus. And so this goes beyond just having a token for your project or for your ecosystem. You want to think about how you bring liquidity to all aspects of your stack. So there's liquidity with value via tokens. There's liquidity with voting via token-based voting, or there are different voting mechanisms, and I'm sure we'll kind of get into them. In fact, I think we have Kevin Owaki that's going to come in and talk to the cohort about a couple of different governance methodologies. But then the third type of or voting methodologies. But then the third type of liquidity is liquidity with governance, and this is, in my opinion, the ability to rage quit. Right. So letting people leave your ecosystem creates liquidity in terms of your governance. That means people who disagree or are not fully bought in exit, and those who are fully bought in enter. And it creates this liquid governance where your most ardent supporters are constantly coming into the ecosystem if you build liquidity in your ecosystem correctly. Okay, so that is the PMF playbook for Web3 and Web3 companies. Just a couple of tips as we enter into phase one. Tip number one, always move towards more specific things. So generalities decrease leverage. What we're looking for, especially in phase one, is we're looking for sharp, clear statements in the lockbox with proof, evidence. We talked about this yesterday. So we're looking for specifics that allow decisions to be made, customers to be targeted, and proof to be gathered, right? Like anytime somebody starts throwing buzzwords at me, or they're talking in generalities or using, just stringing together a bunch of buzzy words, that tells me that they have not dug deep enough into their user, into the problem, into their market, into their unfair competitive advantage, into the insight. And so always be more specific. Go back to the Venmo example that I gave you guys earlier, right? Venmo didn't start out as this global payments system. They started out to help people who were passionate about musicians be able to buy merch at the concert. Be specific. Be specific in your users, be specific in your solution, be specific in your market, be specific in your unique advantage. Specificity gives you leverage and it allows you to gather evidence. Second tip, iterate quickly, move fast. You should be making extremely fast turns. We're not spending months getting into market. We're going to talk about this week low fidelity experiments, and we're going to bring in a couple of founders from our alumni network to talk about their version in Web3. This used to drive me fucking crazy, by the way, especially during DeFi summer. We'd have founders that would tell us, oh, well, I got to write the code and then I got to get my smart codes, contracts audited. Yes, by the way, 100%, you need to have your contracts audited. And in fact, we've got great insurance protocols. But that wasn't the point. The point was there's a big assumption that you are making, a key business assumption that you are making about your users and why they want this particular DeFi product that you can actually tease out through a lower fidelity version of your product. You can scope it way down before you have real money at risk. And so for all of you, iterate quickly. We're looking for you to find new high value directions. Every conversation, every office hours, we want to see your rate of learning increasing. We want to see really fast learnings. We want to see multiple options. Here's how we're thinking about it now as a result of this conversation, that conversation, and that conversation. Every single time you come into office hours, the iterative process should be moving really quickly. In phase one, that's largely going to be driven via office hours and the staff. In phase two, we're going to ratchet that up through something that we call the big board metric, and you'll feel it. The rate of learning will increase when you feel the pressure amongst your peers, because you'll hear different people in your community all of a sudden moving much faster than you, and then you've got to look yourself in the mirror and go, why am I not moving this fast? But in phase one, it's going to be driven largely through office hours and mentor conversations. Lastly, third tip, keep asking why. Go deeper. Just ask why. Just get why tattooed on your forearm. Keep digging into why the problem exists, why the target has the problem, why do they keep experiencing this problem. Many of you are on threads of really interesting problems that still need to be pulled a little bit, and they need to be made more specific and built into a lockbox in order for your company to really grow on top of. So a lot of you have generalities, you have nice to haves, you have macro buzzwords. You don't have specificity. And the way that you get specificity is keep asking why. You must be curious. You have to keep digging into the problem, into your users, into your customers.